I I just had a moment where I just realized something. I've worked in a record store and I've worked in a video rental store.
I almost brought that up because I remember you saying that earlier. I almost was going to say, dude, so you worked at a record
Yeah.
store and a video stuff?
Joining us on conversation today, we have a fellow physical media collector, certified personal trainer. He's the third one now. He's
What?
also yeah, man. We had
Wow.
Bob from Bob's Blu-rays and my friend Holy L. So you're the third one, all
Wow.
CPTs.
That's awesome,
So
man.
he's also a husband, a father, a coach, 80s, 90s buff, especially the horror stuff. We got Garrett from Born to Be Rad.
What is up,
How's it
man?
going?
Thank you so much for having me. It's kind of like long overdue, man. We've been trying to kind of make something work, and now just happened to be right place, right time, especially with the spooky season. It's like,
Spooky
let's
season.
let's talk some horror, man.
Yeah, this is the perfect timing. We could have done it before and had a whole conversation about a general amount of things, but I think this is apropos. This is the right time to do it. So let's do it.
I am down.
So the way we always start off is we start off with a non-movie question and then we'll go from there. So I just mentioned that you're a certified personal trainer. What got you into personal fitness?
So growing up, I was always the smallest kid. I was an athlete, but I was always the smallest one, skinniest, shortest. I didn't really go through any kind of growth spurt until I was probably in like 11th grade. So
Mhm.
I got to a time where sports were no longer a thing for me. I was cut from the high school soccer team. Basically, I was just too small to compete anymore with a lot of the kids in my grade. So at that point, I was like, well, what am I going to do with myself? And my uncle, he's like also the guy who got me into horror movies and all this crazy stuff. He was like, a bodybuilder. So he was like, hey, you ever want to try working out? And I was like, oh, let's try it. So we started doing it. And, I think stars aligned. Like I went through a growth spurt around the same time. So I started to notice a lot of physical changes. Therefore, my, mental attitude changed a lot. Like I started getting a lot more confident with myself. And you could just see the differences, with myself and also the way I acted. The people around me really took notice. So I think that's what really got me into it. I did go to college for a bunch of different things. I started out doing computers. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Then I ended up going for phys ed. And, after everything was said and done, I realized that I wanted to work more with adults, and the personal training thing, took a course in that. And I've been doing it now for about 17 years, full
Oh, wow.
time. So it's definitely, my passion. It's something that is really just a part of my life. And I think that's exactly what the whole thing with fitness is. It's like, you know what, like it doesn't have to be perfect all the time. Like just make it part of your life for a long period of time. And I think that's what's really helped me be consistent and sustain, even just with myself with a crazy hectic schedule. So long story
Yeah.
short, that's kind of how everything kind of fell into place. And I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah. And you have the right attitude. You don't have to go for it all. You just got to do something.
That's right, man. A lot of people's mindset is like all or nothing. And I was like that at one point, but now doing this for a long time. And when it comes to a lot of other things in life, I'm more of like, something is always better than nothing. The worst thing you can do is nothing at all. So that's kind of my mindset going forward. And I think it's really helps a lot of people when they start looking at things from a different lens.
Yeah, for sure. Um, we're just going to jump into it. What inspired the Rad Pack?
It's another thing I always say, everything kind of happens for a reason, man. Like things just happen to be right place, right time, fall together. When I started this YouTube channel, it's actually coming on 2 years at the end of this month, which is crazy
Today.
to me.
No, today. Your YouTube
Really?
channel says it is today. As of this recording, it is today.
Get out. Was it like, I feel like my first video was the Friday 13th set, and I was like, oh, I think that came out around Halloween. But man, if it was today, like, wow, what a coincidence. Like I said, everything happens for a reason, man. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
it doesn't feel that long. It really doesn't. And
Hmm.
when I decided to do it, I was like, listen, I gotta go, I gotta try to be different. I've got to try to be entertaining. And I did the headband gimmick. It was kind of something I've been doing for a long time anyways with like fitness. I did pro wrestling. I had this as a gimmick. it really started with like the love of Corey Haim. I saw him wearing one of these in like a Teen Beat magazine when I was a kid, and I like was like, dude, that's the coolest thing. And I was like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
bring it, try to brand it a little bit. So that's kind of how the whole Rad thing started.
Hmm.
The logo kind of was a ripoff of an Arnold Schwarzenegger shirt from the movie Twins that I was like obsessed with when I was a kid. I was like, that's the weirdest shirt that he's wearing. It's like Born to Be Bad. It had like a baby on it and stuff.
Yeah.
And for years, I was always trying to find that shirt and I could not find it. So when it came down to me, racking my brain about like the channel, it like all just kind of came to me and I just kind of ripped it on that. And, I was doing stuff with Dead Pit, and then the whole like YouTuber of the month thing came around, and I happened to be nominated. And at that time, I had recently met Mel. I had recently met Justin from Movie Watch Daily, and Justin nominated both of us to kind of go into the YouTuber of the month. And at that point, me and Mel had done some collabs and stuff together on my channel. And it was that I think brought everything together. We created some storyline, how, Justin was trying to screw the system and all this stuff. And it just happened to be Dead Pit being like, if you lose this thing, no more shows with us. So I kind of was like, well, I'm going to make my own group. And that's kind of where it all started. And I got the idea and name off the Rad Pack because I'm a big like John Hughes guy, and
Me too.
I felt like the aesthetics of like Mel's channel and the aesthetics of Justin's channel like kind of matched what I was doing. And they're kind of relatively newer as well. So I was like, you know what, let's start like a new like group. Basically, in my head, I'm always thinking pro wrestling. So I'm thinking like DX or something like that, like a new young group that's like trying to like make a name for themselves. So that's kind of where it all started, was like, again, stars kind of all aligned, and my brain
Hmm.
as a pro wrestling brain all the time. It's like I'm creating storylines and gimmicks and groups, and it's just kind of like it kind of just worked. And I think the branding and all the other stuff has helped out, and I'm glad that people are enjoying what we're doing.
I know that your collection, I could see it behind you, is more than just movies. I see you
Mhm.
have props and you have posters and other stuff. But I gotta be honest with you, you look a little too young to have grown up in the 80s. So what's the attraction to the 80s, man? I mean, besides Corey Haim on Tiger Beat,
Listen,
what's the attraction?
it, it's funny. I mean, this conversation go in many ways. I'm a lot older than I think you think I am. I think that most people think I am. I mean, I was a kid in the 80s. I
Hmm.
was born in 81. So
Okay.
I was a kid through the 80s. I mean, I'm going to say late 80s, early 90s is where I really did a lot of movie watching, because that at that age I was, that was the age it was like movies every other weekend and renting and all this stuff. Like I was at that
Hmm.
age where I was starting to dabble in like maybe a little more adult related stuff. And so yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with, like I said, like I've been into fitness since I was 18, 19 years old, and I've never stopped, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot I think that brings into the equation of why I may come off younger than what I am. It's because maybe the way I act, maybe the way I look. I don't know. I take care of myself. I mean, I know that to
It's
me
good health.
that's
It's good
super
health.
important. Like, and I don't, if my brain ages, my body ages. You know what I mean? So I have to, just control the controllables. That's what I said to Justin today. I said it's all about
Hmm.
whatever we control, we control it, because there's so many things out there that we have absolutely zero control over. So let's not focus on that stuff. Let's focus on what we can control. So I did grow up in a special time, and my parents, they were big into renting us stuff. Like, I mean, as a kid, like Ghostbusters, I didn't see it in the theaters. I saw part two in the theaters, but I mean, we had the VHS tape of that. We watched it night and day. I got kind of a little bit of everything based on the era that I grew up in. Like, I was not too old to appreciate all the cartoons and toys and stuff of the 80s. And then at the same time, as we rolled into like the 90s, that's when I really started to catch up on some of maybe the 80s stuff that I might have missed. And then as I got into my teen years, like I said, my uncle has been a horror fan since like the early 70s. So, I started working out with him, and it became like, hey, let's work out, and I'm going to show you my favorite horror movies. I'm going to show you. So basically, he was getting me really involved with the horror stuff at that point. And he was a collector of VHS and DVD. And that really is another thing that kind of got me like, ooh, cool. Like, I want to get some of this stuff. And, he gave me a
Yeah.
little bit of things. And then that's kind of where it all progressed. Like, I've really been collecting hard since probably 15, I would say, when it came to like movies. Um,
Hmm.
but I've always had a collector's mentality. Everything I did, my parents used to say the same thing. So I've always had a weird collector mindset, always.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of it just gets more expensive now as we get older and get more money, you know.
I said that like somewhere between 13 and 15 is like the perfect age. That's when we start going to the movies with our friends, or
Hmm.
in your case, you grew up in that golden age of renting where,
Right.
you know, you could get into 70s and 80s movies really quickly because you almost had access to it. Since this is spooky season, like we said, what's so special about horror movies from the 80s?
For me, it's always just the fun and campiness of it. It's like there's of course nostalgia is going to always play a factor because I really am drawn to movies that I feel like it hits home in a sense. Like I kind of relate to it. Maybe it's has to do with the clothes that I like to wear. Maybe it has to do with how I grew up. Maybe it has to do with, just different situations that I've either seen or dealt with. But I think with the 80s, it's just so fun in the sense where the use, and you see it now, like of just simplicity but the fun and campiness of it. I don't know, it felt like to me that back then it was like they came up with an idea, they just did it. Now I feel like there's always these hoops that everybody's going to go through, get things changed, or maybe they rely too much on old hat, and I think that it
Hmm.
hurts because when you start looking at some of the horror that we're getting that is actually original now, it's way better than when they're trying to redo things that are of the past. And that still just boggles my mind that like we're still talking about people like Jason, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and it's like, wow, like why is every icon like from that time period? Like, why has it not been any more? Like, there's is gonna be a reason that we haven't really got these mainstream icons and stuff, especially in horror. Or I'm even thinking when it comes to anything. Like, I mean, we're talking now about
Hmm.
Top Gun Maverick being number one. Like, where are all the new movies that are to that caliber of something original that all those movies of the past were? It's weird to me. I don't know if it's just they've run out of ideas. I mean, I really don't know what else it could be.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to say that it's, you know, Hollywood has run out of ideas or everything has been done already. But I really think that studios took more of a chance
They
back
did.
then compared to now. And now it's like they're looking for the sure shot. And if they can't see that, then it's a risk. It's a gamble. And I think that's why studios such as A24 are so successful because they kind of take the risk. They kind of look for the original ideas. You're not going to see too
Mm-hmm.
many remakes and sequels on an A24 production. So, you know, that's why you get an X and a Pearl and
Right.
soon a Maxine, because that was an original story, even though it had tropes that we've been seeing
Of
since
course.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the early 70s. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the ability to take that risk, or Lamb, if you've seen that.
But I think you really nailed it on the head of just taking chances on randomness, because that's another thing about the 80s and 90s too, is that some of the movies that they came out with that we consider like, oh, they're classics to us. And it's a lot of ridiculousness, really. Like
Hmm.
Rad, it's about a BMX, bike rider. Like over the top. Oh, we're gonna do like an arm wrestling tournament. This is not like I remember as a kid, I really thought like arm wrestling was like the NFL. That was just a different group. Like that's how much I was invested in that. And it made me really believe. Like, look right here, like, oh, we're gonna make a horror movie about some killer like yogurt like stuff. And that's what's gonna be. Like who would ever sign off on that now, right? Like so I think that's what really to the 80s credit. And even we just did a Rad Pack episode on Encino Man. Like, imagine bringing that to the table now. It would just,
Yeah,
it would never happen. Like, we're gonna do a
yeah,
caveman stuck in ice. He's gonna go to high school. Like, you're right. Like they try to take things way too serious when I don't think it really needs to be. Yep.
ready to get into the five spooky season
Let's
takes?
let's do it, man.
All right, all right. Number one, name the horror movie that made you fall in love with the genre.
I think Fright Night is the one that really set me into the direction of okay, I want to know more about this genre. My uncle, I was a big card collector, mostly baseball cards and stuff. He brought me a box of cards and said, "Hey, happy birthday. I bought you a set of these." And it was these cards called Fright Flicks. And it was basically like
Mm,
horror movie cards. And
yeah,
they had
yeah.
stills
I
from
remember
movies
that.
in it with like these weird little sayings at the bottom of the picture. So, I had pictures of American Werewolf in London in there. And I remember seeing that for the first time. I remember there was a bunch of Fright Night ones in there. I remember watching wrestling in October on a Saturday, and it said coming up next, double feature, Fright Night 2 on cable. So I was like, oh, I gotta watch this. And I watched it for the first time and absolutely fell in love with it. And it was because of those cards that really got me to check it out. And obviously, when I saw it for the first time, it was freaky, but it didn't match what I envisioned in my head based on what these cards like told me. And
Yeah.
that was the one that really got me to be like, you know what, I want to learn more about this. And every time there was a horror movie on TV, I would tape it and watch it. And obviously, a lot of them at the time were cut. They were cut up, like all the Elm Streets and stuff. Like I had them all on taped VHS tapes. And then
Yeah, me
obviously, when
too.
I got a little bit older and I could go and rent them, I would go and rent the regular versions, right?
And
So
then you
I'm
were
gonna,
surprised at the differences from your old
yeah,
VHS bootleg tapes to the
I
ones you
really
rented
was,
from
and
the
it was
store.
like that was the big thing. We were huge on recording movies, and it was funny because yeah,
Same.
you're so used to seeing something one way, and then when you rent it
Hmm.
again, you're like, wait, what's this scene? I don't, and it just doesn't feel right.
Let's get into those five. Let's name five of your favorite horror films.
Some of the ones that I wanted to chat about today is obviously Fright Night was one, and we just kind of brought it up. So, yeah, again, this is definitely up there of one of my go-tos, all-time favorite horror movies is definitely Fright Night for
Hmm.
all those reasons that we talked about before. Is why I just love that movie and I can relate to that movie so much. And I just think the story's great. The special effects are great, pure 80s
Hmm.
special effects that still, in my opinion, hold up better than any CGI that you guys are going to give. And that's another thing too when it comes to horror, like to rely heavily on CGI, it doesn't do it for me. Like it takes me really out of a lot of these movies when they're very CGI heavy. And it's sad
Yeah,
to say because I'm sure there's probably a lot of stuff I'm missing out on, but a lot of times I'm just kind of like, I'll go back and watch Friday Night
yeah.
again. Go
That's
back.
becoming a trend as we have these conversations. People who are into horror movies, they appreciate the practical effects of movies from that time. So, whether you're
Mhm.
talking about The Thing or you're talking about The Fly or whatever the case may be, those practical effects and the makeup artists that, took time and developed techniques for prosthetics and, you know, improved on the fake blood of the 60s to what it was in the 80s, even to today, it's more of appreciation for that than what can we generate on a computer and translate a face into like a scary face or whatever the case might be.
The movie I'm talking about next is one that nobody's going to talk about on this. And it just got a little bit more love recently because it was on the Joe Bob Briggs show. And it's one
Hmm.
that doesn't even have a Blu ray release. And I'm hoping someday it does. And that's a horror movie called Black Roses, which to me is people always talk about Trick or Treat as like their favorite heavy metal horror movie, which is a great movie. But I've always been
Hmm.
a Black Roses guy. I'm a really big fan of like hair metal. So like bands like Skid Row, Warren, White Snake, Poison. Like I love all that stuff. And that
Yeah.
kind of is what this is about. It's basically about a band called Black Roses that come into a small town and they want to perform for all these high school kids. And they're like the hottest act right now in that kind of genre. And basically, what it is the parents aren't sure if they trust this band. They're like, oh, we don't want you listening to satanic music. They're like, no, it's not. And these musicians turn to demons and are playing heavy metal, but they're like demons. But the makeup effects, it's more like they almost look like something you'd see on the Muppets. But it's
Mm.
like, it's something that looks like Jim Henson would make. So to some people now, you're seeing humans interacting with things like puppets like that. It probably looks really silly to most people, but I think it just still works because it doesn't, it seems so not real, but at the same time, it's better than having something animated sitting there on the
Yeah.
other end of the screen and people trying to interact with it. Like it still works for me. And if you haven't seen this, I recommend it. And I think it's definitely on Shutter because
Hmm.
Joe Bob did a special on this. I think he did a back to back with Frankenhooker, which is another pretty cool like uh movie, horror movie from I think it's probably 89, 90 or something like that.
I hadn't seen it, and I was glad to check out. Most of my watches to this season has been rewatches, so it was nice to come up with something different. As soon as I saw Lloyd Kaufman, I was like, "Is this a trauma film?" But it's not. It's not. It plays. How do I say this? A lot more serious than a trauma film. But
Yes. Now,
I
so you've
think,
seen it.
yeah.
Again, I can see this being a movie where a lot of people are like, dude, really, like that movie's junk. But the thing is, what I love about the movie itself is that just the music. It's an album like that. I have the soundtrack that I listen to, and I'm like, man, these are great tunes. And I know this band Lizzie Borden did a lot of the music, but it's just to me the music itself just rocks. I like the whole concept of a band going to the small town to try to kind of take them over, and the effects to me, like I said, are just so 80s and cheesy that it works for me. Like that's the kind of horror movies that I really like. Like I would rather watch that all day than watch like things that are just overly gory. And I don't know if it has to do with my age at this point.
Hmm.
But I find more fun in those type of horror movies than I would like um anything like Cannibal Holocaust or anything like that, where a lot of people will praise. But that's just me, and I'm just curious for someone like you who's just watched it recently. Like, what are your thoughts on it? Because again, like I said, I could see people looking at it from both ways, being like, I don't know about this one.
Well, two things for me. One, when I'm watching a movie, especially since I watch a lot of classic older movies, I always try to be cognizant of the time in which it was made. So, when people are like, oh, that can't happen today because I have my cell phone. Well, you didn't
Mhm,
have a cell phone back then. You damn near had to look for a payphone back then. So,
mhm,
I always take it in the context of the time. And two, and you mentioned this before, I think it's another example of a movie where you're disrupting the conservative peace of a suburban neighborhood. And, whether it's with the music or the band coming there, it was a disruption. And those type of movies I'm attracted to because it's like you're afraid of change. Here's how we're showing you that. And boom, the movie just goes into that element of it. So it was fun to watch, especially since I mean, I used to work at a video store. So I've seen a lot of 80s movies. Most of them I haven't seen since the 80s and 90s, but I've seen a lot. So it was nice and refreshing to see something I've never seen before from that
yeah.
era.
Yeah, I'm glad I can bring this to the table because again, like I said, it for something that doesn't have a Blu-ray or anything, like it's definitely something that went under the radar. And when I remember seeing this for the first time, and when you throw 80s metal monsters, and then the first opening scene, they're driving on the street in like Lamborghinis. I'm like, dude, this movie is all me. Like this is
Yo,
this is
that
rad
was so
right
badass. That was so badass. The Lambos just slowly coming down Main Street in this suburban town.
here. And you know what else I liked about it too, which it was so odd, but at the same time, I was like, all right, this is what I like is when the title screen came up, when the Lambos drove by and it said Black Roses, the title screen was animated like a cartoon, like almost like
Hmm.
something you'd see out of Creep Show. And it was just odd because it's like that really makes no sense for this movie, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense for the movie. And I just thought it was something just unique is to have an animated cartoon title screen and that's kind of all you get of that style for the rest of the movie. It was
Hmm.
interesting to me. That's number two. Number three is one that I think is considered that I would consider to me a top 10 horror classic, and that is Phantasm, which is just
Mm.
man to me. And I hate using the word masterpiece, man. I really do, but I would almost say, in my eyes, this is just almost like a masterpiece of a horror movie. There's something about the tone of that movie that just works for me. It's eerie, it's creepy, it's violent, but not over the top violent. It's about a family and two brothers that are trying to reconnect, and it's about a little brother named Mike, and they have a friend that passed away, and they go to the funeral, and they come across this tall man who's working at the funeral home, and something just doesn't seem right about him, and this kid's seeing some things that's going on with him that he's like, something's up with this dude. He kind of follows him around and realizes there's a lot more about this guy that meets the eye. And I think, again, it almost seems like a lot of the movies I'm choosing are kind of like you said, there's a disruption in kind of like a family type environment or friends type
Hmm.
environment. And it takes place again in the neighborhood somewhat, and it's got good music. The characters are really good. But what drew me to this movie, and I pulled it up here that I wanted to read really quick. On the back of the box, the little summary of the movie for this on One Edition, it was so out of control that I'm like, I've got to check this out. So I pulled it up because I wanted to read it because it just always stuck with me. It said 3.5, a wild, tremendous, energetic horror fantasy. And it says, enter the stunning and surreal world of phantasm where nothing is as it seems and every move you make could lead you to a fate worse than death. Writer-director Don Coscarelli delivers a sci-fi horror classic that has spawned a cult of fans worldwide in which Newsweek calls off the wall, crazy, and marvelous. 13-year-old Mike Pearson had always thought that the Morningside Cemetery was a little creepy, but when he witnesses a body being taken away from the grave by an undertaker with superhuman strength, he decides to investigate. What he encounters in the Morningside is white marbled walls include a grisly murder by a flying metal sphere with a penchant for blood, a horde of cloaked mini monsters who want Mike as one of their own, and an evil tall man. Experience this ultimate nightmare phantasm that will scare you and delight you if you dare to keep your eyes open till the end. So it was wild to me. A floating sphere with a vengeance for blood, a tall man, and cloaked mini monsters. Like, it was so crazy to me at the time that I was like, I've got to check this thing out. Like, I have to. And it delivered, man. And I still feel that it does. And I don't know how big of a fan you are of this movie.
This is one of those rewatches from the 80s, 90s that I had to do. And it was nice to rediscover it because there was a couple of things. So when I did the rewatch, I was like, everything just came flooding back to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's great. And then the first time you hear the music, let's talk 80s for a minute. Do you remember Dougie Fresh?
Of course.
He had a song called Play This Only at Night, and it sampled that Phantasm theme.
No.
So I was like, oh my gosh, I want to hear this song now because it was like such a perfect, it's a very moody theme. So, it's simplistic, but it's very moody. And when I heard that, I was like, Dougie Fresh.
What's the name of the song? I'll die when I hear that. That's unreal. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's called Play This Only at Night.
Wow.
And it's literally the Phantasm theme. So,
it's such a great theme too. Like,
it is. It just plays throughout the movie, and it really sets the mood for it. And I think that's one of the things that this movie does very effectively is every time the terror gets to you or the mystery gets to you, that theme comes rising up, and it just like almost resets the mood for the overall movie. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I consider it a classic, and it's one that just, it gets talked about, but not as much as I feel like it should.
Yeah, definitely. It was a nice callback to classic horror movie. Like you said, it's like people focus on Biggie's, Jason, Freddy, Michael, even Leatherface these days. And it's like you forget that these individual movies had these characters that were legendary in their time. And he was definitely one of them.
The fourth one that I chose was another one that I feel like it's got a tone about it like Phantasm, where it just works. It's a comfort movie for me. It's long, but I think it's one of those movies where it's okay long because I think the story is so good. And that is Salem's Lot, which is a 1979 Stephen King. It's a Stephen King book, but the movie came out in 1979. It's from Tobe Hooper. And this actually was a mini series on TV, two-parter or something. And man, such a great movie to be considered a TV movie here in the States. And it's one of my favorite all-time vampire movies. And I just think it works. And it's basically about a writer who moves to Maine, and he's trying to write his next book. And he starts to realize that maybe there's something going on here in Maine. Like there's some vampire stuff going on, and he's not sure if he wants to believe it. And, kind of very similar tone as Phantasm, where they're in this small town. They think something's going on with somebody that lives there, and they kind of, check it out, and things just start happening. And again, same thing as Phantasm, great tone, great effects, I think, in this one as well, especially for being a TV movie. I love Barlow, the vampire look. He's got that Nosferatu look. I
Hmm.
just think it works really well. I'm not sure when the last time you've checked this one out was.
Probably when it was on TV. I mean, or probably VHS days. Like I remember because that was kind of like the beginning of the Stephen King phenomena and
Hmm.
getting his movies adapted into miniseries on TV and then also movies. And of course, Shining, Christine. It
Hmm.
was the next TV miniseries that came out after that. What was that, 90? So almost like 10, 11 years later.
Right, right.
So I remember it, and I remember that I couldn't believe that this was on TV. Not because of any gore factor or anything, but just the shock and the horror of it that
Hmm.
goes into it.
And this is another one that my uncle really, pushed on me because he lived it. He was a teenager in 79. So when this came out on TV, I think he was like a like preteen because he said he was watching at a friend's house. And after the first episode was over and it was like, tune in tomorrow for the second half. And he's like, dude, he
Hmm.
goes, that bike ride home was like the longest, scariest bike ride of my life. Like for
I
being
can
a for
picture
being
it.
like a 12-year-old kid riding his bike from his friend's house home in the middle of the night after just watching the first part of Salem's Lot. He's like, it's something I'll never forget. And man, like memories like that to me is like what the horror genre is all about. I mean, I didn't live through that kind of situation, but I can only imagine how he felt, And he said he remembers going to see The Exorcist in theaters and seeing people walking out. Like it's, I can only imagine what that must have done for people as far as, how powerful the horror genre was. And I feel like we don't get that kind of stuff anymore because everything's kind of been seen and done at this
Yeah,
point, but it must have been great to like live through that kind of stuff.
I was single digits when I watched that on TV. So I pretty much had like just network TV. So my
Mhm.
my folks probably figured if it was safe to be on TV, it's safe for him to watch.
It's
And the
true.
only
Yeah.
time they would like get upset is if I stayed up on the Saturday for a midnight horror movie or something. And half the time I was, scared out of my wits to even do that. So the funny thing is I watched it and I could tell you I don't remember sleeping well that night.
Now,
But I was attracted enough to want to watch the conclusion the second night.
mhm, mhm. Now what so you've been obviously like you said big movie music lover. Now is this something that you felt that has been with you in your life for as long as you can remember?
Oh yeah, on the music side, I have memories, and my parents have pictures of me. In the 70s, they had like social parties and all that. And, they had to go and change the record on the record player in the next room and all that. They have pictures of me literally DJing their parties at the age of 4.
That is so funny.
And
That's
then
so funny.
movie wise, I've been asking them to take me to movies since the age of 5. So yeah, I've
And when you
and
when you
then
go through different parts of your
yeah,
life, it's like you get out of things, you get back into things.
nah,
Is it always something? Yeah, like I felt like even to me, like I've always been attracted to even music and movies. Like you were just talking about that, it brings back memories. And we have like a home video or on Christmas or something, and I'm dancing,
hmm,
at 3 years old to Michael Jackson's "Beat It."
nice,
Like it was like it's always been with me, the ups, the downs. I mean, man, I'm a big New Kids on the Block fan. I mean, I just grew up in that time and that was such a
yeah,
big thing
yeah,
for me back then. Like that was like a huge, that was my first concert. Like, I mean, there was just so much nostalgia when those guys came out. And I
hmm,
just like all different genres. Like I said, I go from heavy metal to that kind of stuff and, mostly 80s, 90s stuff that I grew up with. But like you said, you go through all different parts of your life, but for some reason, music and movies always kind of stuck with me. And
yeah.
even in high school, where it was like all the kids were partying and this, that, and this, and you always kind of found yourself hanging with a group of kids that just wanted to go rent some movies.
Hold up, my dog's going crazy
It's all
because
good.
my daughter came home. Shh, Ahsoka. Hi, I'm recording, so
Sorry.
no problem. I should have told you before. I knew she would start going crazy when you come home. She's done now. I'm sorry
So
to interrupt,
no, no,
Garrett.
all good. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a great conversation. Like, you know, even during high school where a lot of kids like got out of certain things, they were focused in on parties and girls and all this other stuff. And for some reason, it was always like, you know what, I'm going to go home and hang out with a neighbor and watch like a movie on a Friday night. Or it was just always something that no matter what I was doing in my life, it was always super important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. College was the same way, I everybody came to my room like sometime during the week because they knew, you know, it's Friday, you picked up the new album. So, or you work at the record store. So what's hot? What's new? Can I get the hookup kind of thing? And, or you're DJing at the bar down the street. So, come and see it. And then the same thing with movies. Every Friday or Saturday night, it was either a date or hanging out with the boys to see
Right.
whatever the new thing was. Jason Takes Manhattan, or whatever it is.
Hey, definitely. I mean, I remember that as plain as day when that came out. I slept at my friend's house and we were like, let's rent all the Jason movies. We went, his dad literally let us go to Blockbuster and rent every Friday the 13th. And we did this thing where we watched them all overnight. We didn't sleep and we made like this kill count basically where we said like, oh, part one has this many kills and what there was 3 female, 2 male, and this is how they die. And we did it for all the movies. And I remember
Nice.
Jason Goes to Hell was the one that we had both not seen because it was the most recent. And man, I remember his parents coming down for breakfast and like the TV was here and they were eating breakfast right there. And that tent scene came up and him and I sitting there and were like, oh my God, I hope they don't come around the corner and see what we're watching because we literally were probably like, I don't know, 13 years old maybe at the time.
Nice.
But yeah, it was just, like you said, it was always just so important. And then when we got, when I got my license, then it was like you said, dates were always either going to the theater or going to the movie store and picking out a horror movie to watch that weekend. It was just always how it was. So regardless of what I was doing, it was always really, really important. And then when I really started collecting hard, like I had so much stuff that we didn't really have to go necessarily to Blockbuster anymore. But yeah, it's crazy how certain things in life like stick with you from a young age. But
right.
Well, speaking of that, I got one more
left. Let's get back into it. Yeah, go for it.
All right, my last one that I want to talk about is one of my favorites, and it's The Lost Boys. It's the new 4K. It's, everything about this movie just screams me, man. Like it was the first time I saw it, like I said, being a big Corey Haim fan. I surprisingly didn't see this until later. Like I wasn't a little kid when I saw this. I was probably a preteen when I saw this for the first time. And, seeing Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, who I was big fans of both of them growing up. And then all of a sudden you got the coolness of like Kiefer Sutherland and, Jason Patrick, and you've got Alex Winter from Bill and Ted's. Like it was just everything just kind of worked. And I was looking, like I said before, the fashion in that, the music, the aesthetics of California, everything worked for me on all levels that it became like an instant favorite from that day on.
It was like a John Hughes comedy, but with a horror element to it. That's the way I remember it.
It's not a gory film. It's not a scary film. It's just it just all works on all ends, and it doesn't need that, I feel like, to be as great as it is. And sometimes I feel like movies rely too heavily on stuff like that, where it just touches the surface where I'm like, they could have went so much farther here.
Oh yeah.
With the violence and this, that, and this. And they didn't, and it still just really, really works because I think everybody in that cast just meshed so well, and a lot of memorable characters in this movie.
You have the vampire element, but it really plays more like a black comedy than anything else. And that balances. I mean, I think some of the best horror movies have a beautiful balance between the frightful end and also the comedic end of the movie. And I think that people try to recapture that modern times and it usually doesn't work, but it works so well here. And then you have the reference. I mean, the Lost Boys, the Peter Pan reference right there, and their cool leather jackets and their motorcycles. It's just an overall great ride. It's one of those movies from the late 80s that I just return to time and time and time again.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's, to me, and I was talking about this with Mel the other day, is that the good thing about Lost Boys is, as much as it was an 87 movie and as much as there are things in there like that maybe are as popular anymore, like teenage kids on dirt bikes, like you don't see that anymore. But it feels very timeless of a movie to me because there's not much. They do just enough where you don't look at it and, like you said before, where you're like, well, that wouldn't happen because they could just use their computer or that. Like, they're pretty good about making this seem pretty timeless as a whole, just the way the movie kind of plays out. And yeah, man, I think it just still works. And you bring dirt bikes and the beach and funky hyper clothes and cool hair and rock and roll, and I'm all in.
Yeah. And it's so great because now when I see a reference to it, it makes me smile. Like Jordan Peele's Us, the
Dude,
place that they go to is literally the location of where the Lost Boys took place. And I was like, yeah.
do you know not many people even reference that? And I'm very impressed that you knew that, because being such a huge Lost Boys fan, like that was the first thing that when I saw Us in the theater, I was hooked right from the beginning, because all of a sudden she's on the boardwalk and I'm like, and it said like Santa Cruz or something, and I'm like, huh, that's interesting. But then it said 1986 or something, and I was like, huh. And they actually
Like right before
say,
it happened.
yeah, like they say, I don't know if you remember, they say like, what's going on over there? And they said, oh, they're filming a movie. They
Ding.
say that in the movie, and they're like, you want to be in it? She's like, no. And then as she's walking down the steps to go onto the beach, I shit you not, there's two motorcycle tracks in the sand when she's walking down to the beach. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, talk about, like you said, like an Easter egg, but a thoughtful and a thought out one nonetheless. And I'm a big Us fan, and I think that one doesn't get enough credit as I think personally it deserves. And that
Hmm.
alone, that scene hooked me from the very beginning, because it was just so
Oh,
cool
yeah.
to see that movie was referenced.
With our time remaining, let's hop into the last three questions. So, number three, name a classic horror movie that everyone loves, but you can't stand.
Cannibal Holocaust is one that most horror fans love. I don't. It's not my style. Um, Recent years, like I do not like this Terrifier thing personally. I know that's got a lot of love right now with people, and hey,
Yeah.
maybe the new one will be good. I don't know. I heard it's really long and it's got more of a story. Maybe I'll check it out, but I really have no, like right now I don't have the time to check out something I'm kind of on the fence about. So unless I hear like rave reviews about it, like it's probably going to be something I'm going to pass on, just because like we talked about earlier, time is very slim now. And when I'm doing shows and stuff, like there's specific things that I need to watch and all this stuff. So
Number four, name a critically hated horror movie, and there's a lot that you love.
all right, do you want to roll your eyes right now or
No.
what?
Really?
I don't know why, man. I
Really?
don't understand the hate for it, really. I really don't. Like, I don't get why so many people hate it. Like, I think now
Okay.
that I've seen that, I'm like, I like that better than 2018.
Really?
Yeah. And you know what else?
Okay.
I'll even go one step further, and I say I was a big fan of this.
Okay. I've I've never seen the Rob Zombie Halloween, and I want to see them just to understand the hate for it.
Mhm.
So the two of them, I want to watch it because, apparently I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Michael. And I just got to see what is so like.
You
It's
know,
not going to compare to 78, so don't
no.
even try. But at the
And
same
that's
time,
the
why do
thing,
people
is
hate
that,
it?
you know, I think for me, I think what it really was is that it was kind of right place at right time for me. Like when that came out, I was at a specific age where I think that it really worked for me. Like Halloween was something I always loved, but it was so far past that I'm like, okay, Rob Zombie's hot right now. I'm a big fan of his music. I liked Corpses and I liked Rejects. Let's see what he can do here. And I actually enjoy that they gave him a little more of an origin story. Now, I think what I liked about it the most is that it gave me likable characters. Like I think young Michael was a cool character. I think that they did great with Loomis. I love Scout Taylor Compton. It got me introduced to her. I think Danielle Harris was a good casting. Christina Klebe or whatever. Like I just think he did well with creating characters that you can still believe are these characters, even though they're taking what, Donald Pleasance and Jamie Lee did and still compare it
Mhm.
and be like, they were just as good in my eyes.
And number five, who would you like to see me have a conversation with on this channel?
Hmm. Uh, you haven't had Movie Watch Daily Justin on, have you?
Nope.
So the third Rad Pack member hasn't been on the show. So I'd definitely say
Complete the trifecta.
Justin, just to complete it, of course. And
Nice.
I know these guys are busy, but I do a lot of stuff with Dead Pit. And when it comes to the YouTube thing, like they're kind of underrated because they were so big for anybody that was into horror back in the mid 2000s. And they were so ahead of their time. They were like, they had tables at conventions just about the radio show. They were getting interviews with all these people that were like untouchable. Like these guys were the real deal. And they did a lot for me when it came to like finding out movies to check out and stuff. And they're entertaining. Some people might find their humor maybe not entertaining, but they're different, right? They're very different.
Definitely different.
I think, and to be honest, like they come off a certain way, but like they're honestly like the nicest dudes ever. Like they really are.
Well, that's it, man. This is how we do it. I want to thank you for your time today.
Hey, thank you, man, so much. I had fun chatting. I love talking this kind of stuff, which is like more real, like what we're about rather than just, we're reviewing movies, this, that, and this. And I like hearing other people's stories like yourself. So it's awesome to just kind of hear, what brought people to the dance,
Yeah, definitely. So thanks again.
Hey, thank you, brother. Thank you so much.